Hi again. Have you ever wondered how to parse data from Wikipedia at a particular date? So stick around and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that in Node.js. So the page I'm going to use from Wikipedia is the list of most followed TikTok accounts page. And as you can see here, we have data from that page as at May 31st, 2019. So when we compare the data in this table running on my local host with the actual data in from TikTok, we see that the actual table has been parsed and we already have the data in our local server. For instance, as you can see, number 9 is Cameron here. And here the number 9 is Cameron as well. Of course, in the custom table we have here only shows 10 entries. So if you want to see all the data from that Wikipedia page, you can just show more than 10 entries, and as you can see, it shows all the 15 entries from that page. So the Wikipedia page that I've been showing you is actually this one, which shows the date as 1st of June 2019. Which, if you want to look at the current data, you can click on this link here to see the current page of the list of most followed TikTok accounts. So let's look at the current page. As you can see, here is the data for the list of most followed accounts from TikTok. And to get that in our page here locally, we have this date picker here, which you can select the date. I'm going to select, and not the date today, but the date before today, maybe. And as you can see, it has loaded the data from that Wikipedia page for the TikTok accounts here. So how can we implement this? How can we implement this page where we have the Wikipedia data and we can do whatever we want with it? So I have this Node.js project and I'm going to walk you through several steps and how you can actually implement this in your own project. So even though it's written in Node.js, I'll try as much as possible to make it easy to understand so that you can implement it in any other language or framework that you would like. The main implementation is in these 4 files, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the first file, it sets out the layout of the page. And here we include the scripts and the CSS needed on the page. And in this file, we have the body template. And within this body template is where the content of the second file will be placed. So within the body of a page, we define some scripts, which I will explain in a bit, and a title, a div containing the table, and another div containing the date picker. And for the script, we have this init function, which initializes both the data table and the date picker. So let's look at the init function. Once the document is ready, it initializes the date picker with some configuration options and sets the default date when the date picker is already initialized. And if you notice that once the date picker is selected, then we call this function fetch data. And what it does, it calls an AJAX request to our server to retrieve the data from Wikipedia. Okay. And when the function returns, when the AJAX request returns, it calls this function, the success function. And here is where we initialize our data table with the correct columns and the data from the server. Of course, this can be optimized by just loading the data and not only initializing the data table every time we call the server. So the first 2 files were client-side files, the files that will be shown on the browser. And the next 2 files will be on the server side. So the first server-side file is this index file. By the way, the project is in TypeScript, but that doesn't really matter. So on the server side, we use the Express framework to render the pages according to the request URL that it receives. Okay, so the first URL that we handle is the request for the home page, where we render a main page, which you don't use here. It's just the default. And to explain the second route, actually, I will quickly move this route here to easily explain this. So for the second route is when we call /wiki, which is actually the page that contained the Wikipedia data. And there we render this wiki.hps page with the wiki layout. And if you notice, these two are the previous files that I just was explaining on the client side. And the third route on this index page is /wikidata. And /wikidata is actually called from the client side when you select something from the date picker here. So when you do that, the /wikidata is called, and there is where we actually do the parsing of the Wikipedia page. So this is where it gets interesting. How do we actually do the parsing of the Wikipedia page? Well, if we get the request /wikidata from selecting the date picker on the client, we set up a title, which is the title of the page. In this case, it's a constant. You can actually parameterize this as well. We get the date from the request as a string. And then we call an asynchronous function called getWikiPage. And this is the actual functionality of this whole project. So let's look at what getWikiPage actually does. And this leads us to the fourth file, which is the second file on the server side. So the file is called wikiapi.ts. And here we have a moment library to process dates, a fetch to actually do the fetch from the Wikipedia API. But the most important library here is this WTF Wikipedia library. So let's look at this library from GitHub. And in GitHub, this is the page of the library, and this description simply says that it's a library to parse data from Wikipedia with some examples, okay? So I recommend you having a look at this page to get a feeling of how this library works. It's great. And in the project, we have this getWikiPage function, which takes a title and a date parameter, which I renamed here as @ giving a default value of a particular date. Okay, so we use the moment library to initialize the date from the string to an actual moment object. And then we call this function called fetch wikipage with the title and the new date object. So let's look at this fetch wikipage function, which takes in a title and a date object. We have here the base URL for the Wikipedia API and some parameters. Now, if you want to know more information about the parameters in the Wikipedia API, I suggest you go to the Wikipedia API page, API revisions, and here you'll get an explanation of all the parameters when making a request to the Wikipedia API. For instance, in our case, if we go back to the project, we are more interested in the date of a page in the API, how to retrieve that. And there we have this rvstart parameter, which if you go to the Wikipedia page API and search for rvstart, you will get an explanation of the parameters, which says actually this is the date or the timestamp of a revision of a particular page. So that, for our own purposes, is the main thing that we need, but you can have a look at the rest of these parameters. But what we do next is actually we take this parameters object and create a query string by iterating through the keys and the values of these parameters. Okay. And then next we do the actual request to the Wikipedia API by using fetch URL. And so remember that this URL now has all the parameters that the Wikipedia API needs to retrieve the correct page. So once that request comes back, we get the JSON version of it because we are working with JavaScript here. And then when we have that result, is we get the pages in the result. And in those pages, because it's possible that it will return more than one page, we call parse page with the page and the date that we passed in to this function. Otherwise, if an error occurs, we just log the error. So next, let's look at the final two functions. The first one is the parse page, which is called once the Wikipedia API returns a page to us. And what does it do? We check if the page actually has some revisions. And if it does, then you get the main content, the actual content on the page, because there's some other metadata that is returned. We just get the content and the timestamp of the page. Okay. So on the content, we call the WTF Wikipedia library. And this library can actually help us parse the content, including the table on that page. And then what we do now is we can return this object with the timestamp, date searched. And for the data, we first call this function parse table on the returned content of the WTF page. And what does parse table do? Parse table actually gets the page from the WTF page and extracts the table. And remember, the table is what actually contains the data that we want. In this case, it's the list of most followed accounts in TikTok at that particular date. So how do we do this? So we call the tables function on the WTF page. And then we get the table data using this key value method of the first page table that was returned, because again, there could be more than one table. And then we map over the table rows. And what we want to do here is to extract the data in each row from that page. So up to this point, let's recap using the actual page on the browser. So this whole revision of the page is the WTF page that was returned. And then we look over the content on the page, looking for the tables on the page. And once we get the table, we now want to get the data from the table formatted to our own liking. And therefore we iterate through each row of the table, get the data we want, and set it to the data structure that we desire. So that's actually what's happening in our project from line 68 to line 74. So what we do here, we get the rank of each row in the table, the username, we set it to the owner, the country is the same, data is the followers, and then profession is the profession. Okay, now these other variables are for the different formatting that the page underwent, where they changed the title of one of the rows or two of the rows that I saw from observation. So the older pages had this one formatting, and then the newer pages had this other formatting for the title. So we iterate over the rows and return the data to the calling function. So parse table was called by parse page. Parse page returned this formatted object as timestamp, date searched, and data to the fetch wiki page. And fetch wiki page, if you remember, was called by the get wiki page function, where we return what it returns. Minor typo there. And then get wiki page was called by index.ts when we called /wikidata. So in the end, what happens is that we just return the result with the title and the data from the Wikipedia API result. As a by the way, you can ignore this promise.all. You can just await the normal promise, the result. Here, I was just trying out what if we wanted to return data from multiple dates. So guys, that's basically it. So all we need to do is just call the Wikipedia API, with the correct parameters, get the results, get the content from the result, pass it to the Wikipedia library, WTF library, and from there just parse the tables by getting the row data into our own data structure. That's it. And therefore, to see the results of this project, I'll show it one more time, where I select a date like the same date, 1st of June. It shows the data as at the previous day, May 31st. And then if we select, I don't know, March of 2021, and you can see the data is back with a different user as the most followed TikTok account. And we can actually show all the entries that Wikipedia gives us that was edited on that page at that particular date. So in this case, I put 1st of March, and it returned the date as at February 28th, 2020. So this can be really helpful if you want to create your own projects using the Wikipedia API. All right, that's the end of my tutorial here. So thank you for your support. And if you like this video, you can click like and maybe give a subscribe if you really want to see more videos like this. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.